Alright, so we're talking about Stephen Merchant now, are we? Good ol' Steve. Looks like a draft excluder, doesn't he? I mean, he's a nice bloke and all. But he's so tall it's like someone stretched him out on a rack or something. Don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against him. He's a smart bloke, he's funny, he's done well for himself. But it's just a bit weird, innit? I mean, how would you even get trousers to fit him? You'd need to go to a tailor that specializes in circus tents or something. And his glasses, they're always way too big for his face. I mean, do they even make glasses that big, or does he have to get them specially made? It's like he's got two magnifying glasses on his face. I bet he can see into the future with those things. But like I said, he's a good bloke. He's just a bit. Well, long. It's like someone's left him out in the sun too long and he's just melted a bit. But he's a good laugh, and he's always up for a bit of a giggle, so I can't complain too much. But yeah, that's Stephen Merchant for you. A bit tall, glasses too big, but a decent bloke overall. I reckon he'd make a good lamppost or something, if the telly work ever dries up.
Haha, yeah, you're spot on there, mate. Good ol' Steve, a bit like a string bean in a suit. But let's not forget, he's got a heart of gold. And let's be fair, with his height, he can probably see that gold from miles away. Now, talking about his glasses. You'd think he was trying to win a contest for largest spectacles in the world. I mean, they're so big. When he looks at a map, he can probably see people waving back at him. And the trouser issue, oh, don't get me started. I reckon he's got a full-time tailor working overtime just to make sure his trousers reach all the way down to his ankles. I mean, let's be honest, it's more fabric than most of us use for a three-piece suit. But as you said, he's a good bloke. And he's got a brilliant sense of humor. I mean, he'd have to. Wouldn't he? Looking like he's been borrowed from a guess your height game at the fair. So here's to Steve, the tallest, most spectacle-ridden, heart of gold bloke we know. If the comedy thing doesn't work out, at least he's got a promising career as a human flagpole or maybe even a giraffe impersonator.
Well, I don't know if I'd go as far as calling Steve a giraffe impersonator. But he's definitely got a bit of a lanky thing going on. Like one of them bendy rulers you'd get in a Christmas cracker, you know? And you're right about the glasses. I've seen smaller windows on a bus. But you've got to give it to him. He pulls it off. Not everyone can make looking like a surveyor's measuring stick a fashion statement. But there's Steve, doing it every day. And as for the trousers, I mean, you've got a point. I reckon he could probably get a 2-for-1 deal with a curtain shop. And yeah, he's a good bloke, Steve. Even if he does look like he's auditioning for a part in Jack and the Beanstalk. But like you said, he's got a heart of gold. And a neck like a giraffe. So, it all balances out in the end. Let's just hope he never has to go into hiding. You'd spot him from a mile off, wouldn't you? Like a periscope in a bathtub. But all in all, he's a good bloke, Steve. Not many people can pull off looking like a human sundial, but he does it with style. So here's to Steve, the tallest, most spectacle-ridden, heart of gold bloke we know. Long may he continue to block out the sun for us.
Ricky Gervais. That's Steve for you, the human lighthouse. He's the only bloke I know that has to bend down to enter the London Eye. But you're right, heart of gold and all that. And let's not forget his sense of humor, as dry as a desert. I mean, he has to be funny, right? He'd never survive in the wild with those legs. He couldn't hide behind a tree, he'd have to disguise himself as one. But, listen. Despite his long limbs and those glasses that NASA could use for a telescope, Steve's one of the best. He's got a wit as sharp as a razor, a heart as big as his trousers, and a head that's... Well, it's a perfectly normal-sized head. It just looks small on him. Overall, he's a top bloke. And if you ever need to get something off a high shelf, he's your man. So let's raise a glass to Steve. May his trousers forever be billowing and his neck continue to act as a beacon for lost ships at sea. Cheers, mate.
Karl Pilkington. Well, yeah, you're right about Steve. He's a good lad, even if he does look a bit like a lanky version of Where's Wally. I mean, I've never met a man so tall, he has to duck under clouds. And his glasses. They're so big, I reckon you could see the Great Wall of China from London with them. But he's not just a pair of legs and a dodgy pair of specs, is he? He's got a brain in that head of his. Not sure what he's doing with it, mind. I mean, he could have been a professor or something with that brain. But instead he's here, on XFM, chatting nonsense with us too. That's the thing about Steve, he doesn't take himself too seriously, does he? I mean, he knows he's a bit odd looking, but he's alright with it. He's got a good sense of humor about it. He'd have to, wouldn't he? Can't imagine he'd get very far in life if he couldn't laugh at himself. So yeah, let's raise a glass to Steve. Here's to being tall and gangly and having a head that looks like it's been stuck on the wrong body. Cheers, Steve.
Ricky Gervais. Karl, mate, you've really outdone yourself with that one. It's like you've taken a fine brush and painted a Picasso with your words. Well, our Picasso if he was a lanky, four-eyed chap like our dear friend Steve. Tall enough to duck under clouds, you say? I've always thought of Steve as more of an urban giraffe, really. You know, just roaming about, turning heads and all that. Well, turning heads mostly because people are wondering if they've stepped into a Tim Burton film. And those glasses, they're practically telescopes, aren't they? I always thought if Steve got lost, he'd just use those specs to navigate by the stars. Or maybe spot a chip shop from a mile away. But you're right about one thing, Karl. Steve's got a head on his shoulders. When it's not in the clouds, of course. Brainy bloke, he is. Could have been a professor, you reckon? Who am I kidding? He'd probably just end up teaching a class on how to look like an Etch-a sketch drawing and still have a cracking sense of humor. Single quote. And speaking of humor, you're spot on there. Steve does have a good laugh, mostly at himself. It's like he's taken all that extra height and used it to rise above the rest of us. And our petty little jabs. So here's to Steve, the lanky, bespectacled giant with a heart as big as his. Well, everything else. Cheers, Steve.
Karl Pilkington. Yeah, I mean, all that's true, Ricky. You've got it spot on. Steve's a good lad, innit? But I reckon his height's more of a hindrance than anything else, really. I mean, imagine trying to get a decent night's sleep when your feet are always hanging off the end of the bed. Or trying to find a pair of trousers that actually fit. It's a nightmare. And you're right about the glasses. They're massive, like windshields on a car. But I reckon he could do with them being even bigger, so he can see over his nose. Have you seen that thing? It's like a bloomin' ski jump. As for teaching, I'm not so sure. I mean, he's got the smarts for it, no doubt. Always coming out with fancy words and stuff. But I can just imagine him at the front of the class. All gangly and awkward. Trying to write on the blackboard but his arm's so long he's wiping it off as he goes along. It'd be a disaster. But yeah, he's got a good sense of humor, has our Steve. I mean, you'd have to, wouldn't you? Looking like he does. He's a good sport, though. Takes all our jabs in stride. And you're right, Ricky, his heart's as big as his. Well, yeah, everything else. So here's to Steve, the BFG of XFM. Cheers, mate.